A beautiful sunny day, and I'm happy to have and be able to introduce Mike Wilson, who's an environmental engineer and the third district supervisor for Humboldt County. As an environmental engineer who grew up in Humboldt County and earned an MS in environmental systems engineering from Cal Poly, formerly HSU, Mike Wilson has represented the Third District, Arcata, Blue Lake, Freshwater, and Manila on the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors since 2018. It's kept him rather busy. Prior to becoming county supervisor, he served 9 years on the board of the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District, where he supported a balanced approach to economic development of the harbor and environmental protection. Since 2019, he has served on the California Coastal Commission. During his time at Humboldt Bay Harbor Commission as Humboldt Bay Harbor Commissioner, he led successful efforts to restore wetlands and estuaries, expand oyster and seaweed farming, clean up the contaminated Samoa Pump mill site, and create sustainable living wage jobs. As supervisor, he's worked to increase safe and walkable neighborhoods, protect cherished open landscapes, create affordable housing, increase renewable energy production, and expand emergency and long-term mental health services. The California Coastal Commission is a state agency within the California Natural Resources Agency with quasi-judicial control of land and public access along the state's 1,100 miles of coastline. That's a mouthful or two, Mike. So thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And it's all yours now.
Okay, well, it's great. Glad to be here. Thank you, Jane, for having me. Yep, that was a great introduction. Good summary of my where I'm at. And just wanted to say this is the 50th year of the California Coastal Act, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that and about what the commission does and sort of the where it all comes from. So what I have is a bit of a hodgepodge of PowerPoints, short PowerPoints that collected from staff and other places in terms of the various issues and sort of the where we're coming from. And I guess what I'll do is I'll just take questions after each one of these little segments. And I have a couple of videos that sort of talk about the what happened 50 years ago.
And you can put your questions if you wish in chat.
You
And
can, but I may not be able to see them just because I'm not super
oh, I know.
Zoom
We'll
efficient
let you
here.
know if
So,
there's something critical, if
all
it
right.
ends up, or we can deal with them all at the end. How's that?
And just so everyone knows, I'm not I don't do a lot of sharing of stuff on Zoom, so this will be a little bit clunky, and you're going to see my very messy desktop. So that's just kind of how it goes today. So the first thing I just want to just talk about is just sort of the constructs and of the history of where and what we talk about as public trust lands or public trust resources. And it's great to see Alderon Laird here on this talk because everything that I learned from him and I got everything I learned about public trust I really got from Alderon. So and so everything I get wrong is not his fault. So I just wanted to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with sharing just a basic just a basic history of where public trust uh, uh, construct comes from, and I'm just going to drop this in and see if this works. So we're going here, and I'm going to do this. Is it working? No, of course it's not working. Why is it not working? All right. Well, what do you see? I can't see what you see, but it says I'm sharing a screen
Well,
and
go up to the top and hit slideshow.
go up to the top and hit slideshow. Oh, okay.
Further all along the top, the ones in
Okay.
boldface. Go in the middle. Go to the middle. You'll see
Slideshow.
slideshow.
Okay, here we go. All right.
Hit it.
Presenter view, play from start. Here we go. All right. Ta-da. All right. You guys can
Great.
see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to talk about the public trust doctrine. I want to talk about this because it's really the basis of why we have the Coastal Act. And it's always interesting because I think people often just feel like it just was happenstance that we have public access to our coastlines, and that and maybe even might even started with the Coastal Act that we have public access to our coastlines. But really, there's a whole construct that was created long before the state of California was created, and it goes back to Roman law and English common law, and it goes back uh, to where basically the Roman Empire and those governments at that time really started the construct around that no individual could hold exclusive rights to navigable waters, that public right existed independently of the government grant, and that there was basically inalienable rights of folks, and of course, as you know, not everyone was equal at those times, but in any case, you get what I'm going for here, which is that this construct of public access to these resources. It also extended into English common law, and so those those basically the crown held those trust lands and managed them, and that's why you see often these people talk about how people can access royal lands and then also navigable waters and tidelands. So then those constructs basically were thought about and talked about in American history, but really the first time that there, not the first time, but probably one of the most significant times that was became a really big issue is when the Illinois legislature gave away the entire Lake Michigan shoreline to a Illinois Central Railroad, and not just the shoreline, but 1 mile in. So that grant was so audacious that it basically created pressure and forced the legislation to repeal it, and that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that no, the state can actually do these public. Basically, the state doesn't have the right to give away these public trust lands. So now moving into California, entering the Union. Again, this is just the most summary view of how we're getting into this place. Upon statehood, California inherited an English common law, placing the state as a trustee of all sovereign lands. And before it was California was in the United States, it was in Mexico, and Mexico also had these laws. And so there was already a transfer that had occurred from Mexico to California in terms of the public trust resources. Became so the tidelands and lands underlying navigable waterways became property of the state. The doctrine was applied to the California tideland disputes as early as 1850s, and California adopted English common law in 1850, and then the State Lands Commission was established in 1938. It's in the Constitution of California. Water resources must be put to beneficial use to the fullest extent. All tidelands within 2 miles of any incorporated navigable water are withheld from grant. Excuse me. Oh, shoot, it's bouncing around here. Anyways, public access is mandatory and liberal. And here's the actual language of the Constitution. And I guess what I want to highlight here is this sentence here, and there we go. The legislature shall enact such laws as will give the most liberal construction to this provision, which is that no individual partnership or corporation claiming or possessing frontage tidal lands of harbor, bay, inlet, estuary, other navigable waters of the state shall be permitted to exclude the right of way of such water whenever it requires any public purpose. So that liberal construction was pretty important as we move forward. Let's see what's happening here. There were discussions around in the California Supreme Court in 1971. And in 1970, there was published sort of law review that was really talking about expanding the public trust doctrine from more of a commerce perspective to a really like a conservation and natural resource management. It was adopted in that way, in the way people started talking about public trust resources. So here's sort of going through all those spots that we just talked about, all the way down to the California Coastal Commission in 2023 adopted a public trust guiding principles and action plan for sea level rise and adaptation. So the Coastal Act and the Coastal Commission. So there's the background. So by mid-century, the private developer was blocking public beach access in California, and voters passed Proposition 20 in 1972, creating the California Coastal Commission. And um, and the Permanent Coastal Act was followed in 1976. It's designed to protect the coast and prevent overdevelopment and preserve open space and wildlife habitat, but also it is also about access to the coast itself. And so it actually promotes development of those resources and those things that we need to have a balanced approach to how we access the coast in terms of visitation and use and all those things. And directs for maximum public access. The California Coastal Commission was created as both as sort of the permitting and enforcement agency, kind of overlooking the what was created as the coastal zone. And so coastals and cities and counties develop their own coastal programs within that act, and we help them do that. Um, who protects public trust? There is the State Lands Commission, the Coastal Commission, and local governments. We, as local government folks, we swear an oath to the Constitution. That Constitution tells us that we need to manage public trust resources for all citizens of the state of California. And what I find we're often doing on the Coastal Commission is reminding local governments that that is something they're supposed to do, that it's not necessarily to protect the development interests of their direct constituents and friends, but it's actually to manage these resources for everybody. Again, who owns the beach? California is unique in that almost all of our coastline, virtually all of our coastline is accessible to the public. This is extremely unusual. I was just reading an article that I think it's less than 1% of the coastline of Jamaica is accessible to its public. So we are on the other end of that spectrum, and we have to fight for it every day. There is a new issue, which is for us, which is the sea level rise and how it moves the tide line, because that tide line is something that we have to manage for, which is basically a line that says where the public trust lands stop and start. And so it's moving now. It used to be, we used to imagine it being static or stable, and now we have to be really thinking about how it is moving along. So I'm going to stop share for just a minute. I'm going to jump back in. I have a few more other little presentations I'm going to do as well, but I just wanted to if you have some questions around public trust lands or public trust resources, is a good time to ask me that question. And if there's none, I'll move on to the
I have
next.
a quick question.
Yes.
When you have a moving sea level rise,
hmm
how do you define where the line is
Well,
for your
typically
delineate?
it's called mean high tide is where that line is, but that's moving in. And we really right now, in terms of how we do policy around that for the commission and the policy that we've been extending out to local governments is you need to start preparing for those changes. And there's two parts of that. One is where the line moves to and from, but also like what are the impacts to both the infrastructure and the private and public property uses that may be impacted by those changes. And so it's very complicated because humans aren't that great at thinking 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead. It's very difficult to do. And we're invested both financially and our human egos into the existing infrastructure that we've built. And so it's a dynamic situation. That's all I can say.
Each local government has to provide a coastal plan, is that correct?
Yep, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. If you want me to jump right into that, I can do that.
Yeah, that would be interesting because the two come in conflict, do they not?
They
Oh,
can, they
yeah.
can. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Am I still sharing? I don't know.
No, you aren't.
No.
You'll
Okay. Let
come
me go
back.
back to sharing again. Sorry about that. That's the boom, boom. Go back to share. Let's share my thing. Here we go. Share. Okay. Are we sharing now? You are sharing.
Yes.
You can see it. Okay, great. So I'm going to do what I was told to do before, which was try to,
Go back to slideshow along that top.
yeah, I'm trying to get there, but there's stuff blocking it, of course. Okay, there we go. Got it. Bang. Okay, here we go. So this was made for California state parks, so there will be some things I kind of jump over, but I think it'll give a good overview of kind of where we're at as a commission. And again, the commission is created basically as a permit and an agency over and from the Coastal Act. So oftentimes people tell me, well, does the commission, will they allow me to do this or allow this project to do that? And I always say, well, it's really the Coastal Act that determines whether that is. What we do is we adjudicate that, so we review the consistency of a project through the lens of what is the Coastal Act. And um, so one thing I want to talk about just for a second here too is that the federal government has an act from 1972, which is around the same time, called the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act, and that is that is that is the program for which the feds basically manage or communicate with states about these coastal zone areas and give states a voice in coastal zone management issues that are federally uh, uh, administered in terms of um, federal waters or state, excuse me, not state parks, but like federal lands, including military areas and those sorts of things. And we've seen some of that. There was some controversy around that uh, sometime a couple years ago around Vandenberg Air Force Base and SpaceX. But there's a lot more programs than just that. And then, under there, we have the California Coastal Act with the California Coastal Commission. There's the San Francisco Bay Conservation Development Commission, and there's the State Coastal Conservancy. And the Coastal Conservancy is, I kind of feel like from my perspective, sort of like it's like the feel good arm of this because really they're kind of a funding and policy group that helps move us along in terms of programs that help develop and expand access to the coast and protect resources. On the California Coastal Commission, there's 12 voting members. I am one of them. I was appointed, I think in 2018. I was Governor Newsom's first appointment to the California Coastal Commission. I represent Humboldt, Del Norte, and Mendocino County areas in terms of where we're at, in terms of the way that the coast is divided. There are four of the voting members are put on by the governor, four by the pro tem, which is the state senate, and four by the assembly, the leader of the assembly. There's three non-voting members, which is Caltrans and Natural Resources, and then it switches off between a couple other agencies. Coastal zone. All the counties have coastal zones. The land portion of the coastal zone is shown in red here. It covers all 15 counties. Um, and it's a significant amount of land and linear ocean space there. What's covered? Coastal Act includes policies that identify environmental other public resources within the coastal zone. It includes policies that identify types of uses of land and water and that receive rights and privileges and protections relative to other types of land uses. Coastal Act includes policies that address physical siting, design, development, and we really of late have talking a lot about risks from hazards. And the Coastal Act includes policies of siting and pattern development in consideration of overarching land use planning constraints and regulatory overrides. In our regulatory program, there's permitting, which is basically coastal projects, coastal development permits. It could be an addition to a house all the way up to uh, a desalinization plant or something like that. And of course, it includes lots of road works and public works and private developments, including hotels and other things, and parks as well. planning, local coastal programs. I think this is what was just being asked about before. Every city and county uh, has the opportunity to create a local coastal program by which then they lay out the ordinances and the land use planning and their general plans to basically conform with the Coastal Act. And then we say, oh, yep, that works, that you're conforming with the Coastal Act with all those policies. Go forth and do that so that all those projects and plans and things don't have to come through us directly. You've shown that you can interpret your land use code through that Coastal Act lens and move forward. And generally speaking, that's how it works for vast majority of projects in the coastal zone, unless they're appealed. So there's an opportunity for local folks or actually anybody can appeal those projects to us depending on whether they're in retained jurisdictions. And there's a couple other layers there, but we won't go into that too much. And so then there's the federal consistency part of this. And so consistency determinations, we basically do certifications and determinations on federal projects, which is not a permit. And so maybe even if you've been following a little bit, sort of the issue around, say, the rancheria in Trinidad, and there was some controversy around that. And we were analyzing, and what we do is we analyze whether the project they're looking for is consistent with the Coastal Act, but it's not a permit because we don't permit things that are not in California's jurisdiction. And for the most part, people can or agencies sometimes just move forward with our determination being inconsistent. And that would, for instance, SpaceX didn't blink an eye. There was an inconsistency determination made by the commission for their program for various reasons, and they just kept moving forward. So
Do you have any legal recourse?
there is some legal recourse that can be done, sort of. We can litigate on those things, but we have to make a determination internally as to whether or not that's something that's going to work or not.
Have we ever litigated?
Yes, there has been some litigation, and I can't remember what it is right now. I can't remember. Well, I can get back to you on that. But it's
Yeah,
very
because
rare. We very rarely litigate on our federal consistency determinations.
so it's very difficult to enforce against the federal government.
It's
Almost impossible.
well, so the commission as a state agency basically has to lean on or be, or really have the support of the state attorney general's office. So we are we work in conjunction with the state attorney general's office. So there is some, it's not something we generally can just kind of go alone about. So. Uh, but I will, and we're going to get to it in a minute, which is that that the federal government has reopened the Coastal Zone Management Act a review process, which we just went through 2 years ago, which typically happens every 10 years. And so that's something we can talk about a little bit. And they've stated their reasons that they're concerned that the Coastal Act and by extension the Coastal Commission will get in the way of offshore oil drilling, development, space exploration, and uh, and desalinization plants.
Aren't they also undermining NOAA?
Well, that is NOAA. They are NOAA. So
Okay,
yeah,
that's the vehicle through which they're operating,
yes, they
the
are
one
NOAA.
they're trying to shut down.
Hmm. All right. So Coastal Act definition of development, placement of any solid material structure, discharge or disposal of dredged materials, grading or removing, change in density of use. So that's like land use changes or those sorts of things. Change in use of water or access thereto, construction, reconstruction, demolition, basically alteration of existing facilities, public and municipal, and removal or harvesting of major vegetation. And what that means is like in terms of uh, big trees, but also in terms of fire management programs and those sorts of things. We have some uh, jurisdictional uh, impact on those. Permit jurisdiction, development of tidelands, development uncertified LCP segments. So not every community has an LCP, has a local coastal program. I think we have 15 that don't. One of them is Santa Monica, and they just this year tried to do some legislation to exempt them from having to do that. But we have adjusted or helped to adjust that legislation so that now they will come. We're going to work with them to bring them into the local coastal program.
How far inland do you have control? Isn't it 3 miles?
No, that's 3 miles out. And here's the map in. So what I'm getting at here is what you can see here. So that map was drawn. There was basically, it was drawn at the time that the act was put together. And for the most part, it goes inland where basically any kind of sea, where there's seawater that kind of comes into the coast, so all the estuary systems and those sorts of things. And then if not that, it's the first major road that it hits. And if it's not that, it's some line that was probably created because the legislator had some ability to modify those lines at the time that it was created. And it's very difficult for modifications to this because it takes an act of the legislature to modify these coastal zone boundaries. And that's what I have in terms of who we are in this moment. And I'm going to stop sharing here and come back to if anyone has any questions. And I'm going to do a couple little like videos I think we have time for, and we'll have some questions. So
When we had purchased that 5 acres in Monterey, which happened to be exactly on the border of the 3 mile. That's why I asked about the 3 mile. And we had to go through this incredible series of evaluations of the property. And it took 5 3/4 years to finally get a permit so we could develop. And that had Rocky Creek crossed the border of that property. Would it be was the issue Rocky Creek? Possibly.
I don't know. That's
It's an interesting issue. That's why I got into this issue because
yeah, you're getting a little granular for me in terms of like, I can't.
That's why I was asking how far inland it went because
It
the
really
only
depends.
tide of the coast was Rocky Creek.
Really depends. So I can't see any written questions if anyone has any, but I'm happy to move on because there's this like a video of kind of how the Coastal Act started and who was involved in it. And I want to share that if I can. And I'll try my best to do the sharing thing again. Here we go. All right, sharing desktop. And let's see, escape this and put that one down. And we're going to go to this one here. And we're going to see here. And all right, can you see that?
Yes.
All right.
So back in the late 60s and early 70s, the face of California was changing extremely rapidly and not for the better.
There was so much rampant development. The idea of having all those big buildings lining up along the coast, like we're in Hawaii and other places in the world, I think really freaked people out.
PG&E at the time, they wanted to build a nuclear power plant every 20 miles along the California coast.
They were going to level off the top of San Bruno Mountain and then build condos up on top of the mountain on the mesa. And they were going to take the dirt from all that they had leveled off on conveyor belts down over the freeway to fill the bay so they could build more houses in the bay. That's the kind of thinking that was going on.
Development was largely the province of local governments, cities and counties. And all you need to get a project approved at the local level is basically 3 votes on a Tuesday.
The real estate interests that own the California coast pretty much owned Sacramento and ensured that no legislation that would thwart their economic desires would pass.
And so the bill failed. So when that occurred, we decided we had to go to the initiative.
They were going up against the who's who of California industry, all of whom were donating in the tens of thousands of dollars apiece. They hired Whitaker and Baxter to run the No on Prop 20 campaign. And Whitaker and Baxter were sort of the grandfathers of sort of dirty tricks and disinformation.
If you are a student of politics, Whitaker and Baxter is sort of like the Darth Vader Death Star of political campaign firms.
They're making up stuff. So I think it invoked anger and frustration, and it pissed people off. And sometimes that's good.
They had the money and we had the energy, you know. They had the corporations and we had the people.
This was like grassroots versus money, grassroots versus the real estate industry, grassroots versus developers.
What they managed to do, from living rooms and over kitchen tables and standing outside supermarket, I mean, it was an extraordinary coming together of the public on a statewide basis, all with the same goal. That you had people taking leaves of absence from work. There were a couple of doctoral students in marine biology in Los Angeles who basically suspended their doctoral thesis until the end of the campaign.
You know, there was this sort of emerging environmental consciousness and political power or force that was emerging. And it all came together, everybody came together for the entire coastline.
Peter Douglas's slogan was that, you know, the coast is never saved. The coast is always in the process of being saved. And I think you can expand that to almost any environmental issue.
The Coastal Act is the floor. The Coastal Act is the foundation. Nothing happens to protect the coast unless people stay engaged. I mean, the Coastal Act is simply a tool for people to use to protect the coast, but it is still an active requirement.
I think it's a remarkable achievement to be able to take a big industrial state like California and have statewide governance along its entire coast. I think the act is probably the strongest land use planning act, maybe in the world.
For us, we see everything on coast and ocean through the lens of environmental justice, and that is our, unique view. And I think that without the Coastal Act, without Prop 20, we really wouldn't even have this conversation.
It's really the public who has to protect it, because without the public standing up for it and speaking on its behalf, I fear it won't continue to exist.
I think Prop 20 was kind of the turning point of being able to make us realize that it's not just the land that's important, it's the sea and this incredibly valuable coastline that we call California.
I think you could go up and down the coast and go look at it now and see vacant areas and imagine that if the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors had their way, if Half Moon Bay had their way, if the LA County Board of Supervisors, San Luis Obispo, things would have exploded from just the pressure. The ground is so precious. The views are so good. It's so spectacular. And I'm sure you could say that about many parts of the state, from San Diego all the way up.
Peter Douglas used to always say that the greatest accomplishments along the coast are the things that you don't see. The wetlands that weren't filled, the freeways that weren't expanded. It's really the natural features of the coast that are the greatest accomplishments of Prop 20 and the Coastal Act.
It changed the face of California forever.
Okay, there's one more thing I wanted to share. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. There's an hour-long version of this that I'm not going to share, but I do want to, if I can find it here, share a piece of it. And that's the piece that that's the North Coast section. So let me just bring up, you can see on here, it's called the North Coast Campaign. It's basically, it's really an hour-long documentary about the creation of the Coastal Act, but I wanted to share this piece of it because it's kind of unique.
Well, Peter Douglas was very hands-on. He was traveling all up and down the state of California, meeting with environmental groups, meeting with advocates. He told me about going up to the North Coast, where it's pretty conservative up there. But there were little groups of advocates up there who wanted to do what they could to help protect the special resources of the North Coast. But they couldn't afford to be seen with him. And so they arranged to meet him in one of the state parks, like behind a specific redwood tree at a particular time of day, so that they could appear to be like nonchalantly going out for a hike and not be spotted by some of the more conservative reactionary elements of the populace up there. Because one thing that's still true about Del Norte and Humboldt County is everybody knows everybody up there, and there are no secrets.
There was an existing community of environmentalists here. We had our local Sierra Club chapter and Audubon chapter and California Native Plant Society and others. But they were a distinct minority in the community, and lumber was king, economically, politically. There was a pretty powerful coalition between the labor unions and the timber industry, and anyone who challenged the industry was challenging what were essentially the best paid jobs in the county. We had two pulp mills, which created quite the smell. One of the quotes that was a kind of a common trope back then was, "That's the smell of money." And so there was just really a very powerful backlash to any kind of regulatory invention in Sacramento.
I would say that tension between local control and state control was at the heart of the Coastal Act. And it made a lot of people angry who didn't like it, especially you get into rural areas of the North Coast and Humboldt and Del Norte. When you get up to the North counties, it's a lot of leave me alone, libertarians, I have my property, stay off my property. So the politics of the North Coast were different than the politics of Monterey Bay.
Those groups got together and organized an Earth Fair on Earth Day at the fairgrounds in Eureka. And that coalesced into the formation of a group called the North Coast Environmental Council, who then decided to establish a center called the North Coast Environmental Center. The Prop 20 campaign reached out to us and asked for our help. And it was a nonprofit organization, so we kept the Prop 20 campaign outside the front door, but really the Environmental Center was the initial connection with Peter Douglas and the other folks who were putting the campaign together. Most of us newcomers came from parts of California where the coast was much more threatened. And so we were, I think, more aware of what could happen. I think there was a extreme mistrust of outside authority, and a kind of we can take care of ourselves, local control attitude. Things were so polarized, and it was also cultural because the environmental community was viewed as the long-haired hippies from the campus, and so there was a real us and them divide. Senator Jim Mills was going to do a bike ride from San Francisco to San Diego, and we decided to hatch our own bike ride from the Oregon border to San Francisco Bay. And so a group of the photographs I've looked back at, I think there were 15 or 20 of us who went up and started on the Oregon border and rode down to the San Francisco Bay. We didn't get anywhere near the statewide publicity that, because we didn't have the kind of celebrity like a senator, but we did get lots of localized attention. Riding bikes on little narrow 2-lane roads with logging trucks roaring by, in the first place is a little bit of an iffy proposition, but if you're doing it, and they've heard what you're doing, or they see the signs on your bikes, it can be really, have a truck bear down on you and be a foot away with the blare in their horns, can be a little bit of a heart stop experience, and I have some pretty powerful memories of that. We rode through Fort Bragg, which today, of course, would be celebrating our arrival, and there was some serious harassment, people honking and screaming at us, and but the Mendocino coast was a really, really conservative place back then. So really the impact, other than it being really an interesting experience, really the impact was when we would roll into a more urban community. And we had a really positive experience in Eureka where we had a rally at the courthouse. And when we came riding across the Samoa Bridge and then into Eureka, there was a big welcoming crowd. So that was the probably the high points. And then getting to the Golden Gate Bridge, of course, and riding into San Francisco.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing there. So, anyways, I just wanted to give a little history about, what Prop 50 did and how it started uh, and sort of what we've accomplished since then, which is really a very accessible coast and in a time now where we're really that is really under attack. So I'm happy to take questions. I think that's it for my presentation part of this talk. It looks like we have another 45 minutes to do questions and kind of roll this around wherever you guys want to go. I'm happy to have any kind of discussion you want around my role, what we do as the Coastal Commission, both locally and statewide, and then any other things. And also, Alderon, if you have anything to add in terms of the public trust doctrine or our roles in that, I'm happy to. You won't be stepping on my toes if you have anything to say about that. So.
Yeah, people come up and talk and ask questions aside from me. Otherwise, I'm stuck asking them.
Yeah, and if there's been, I mean, I'm happy to if there was things that are controversial or whatever, I'm happy to talk about those things in the way that I can. So understand that some things are in litigation. We're being litigated against constantly. So I have to be careful about what I say about certain things, but I'm happy to talk about them in as transparent way as I can.
Alderaan?
What might have happened on the North Coast if Prop 50 had not been in effect? What might we have seen? You mean mostly houses on the coast, or maybe just logging to the coast, or just out of curiosity?
It's hard to tell in this context because my experience is only in the last, say, 8 or 9 years. I do know that there were a host of proposals for development, even in Humboldt Bay. There was a proposal for a marina in Arcata. Which would have had to been dredged out. There were proposals for doing more commercial developments along the corridor, and I mean by that it's south of Eureka as well. Certainly, you would have a lot more billboards currently. I mean, and we're, been fighting that for sure. There are, I would say that most of the impacts in terms of the Coastal Act and the Commission really have to do with in the bay, and that's around wetland fill and those sorts of things, and sort of making sure that we have mitigations and protections, and also the expansion of access. So, I mean, I've been on a bunch of decision-making processes where there are proposals by not just private entities, but public agencies to do certain things. And the push by the commission has been like, well, okay, that's great, but where's the access part? Where's the trail? Where's the parking? Where's the bathroom? How's that all going to work? And so really pushing not just the private entities, but also the public agencies in terms of access. And then, of course, we're really we're in partnership with Fish and Wildlife for the protections of eelgrass and those sorts of things, and a lot of cleanup work that has to happen as well. So, really here, it's been more the protections from those perspectives. It's possible there would be more. I mean, of course, there would be more coastal construction of housing, I would imagine. Although I have to say we use that term very liberally because, as I say, observe often in this job, is like the closer to the beach and the bigger the structure, the less likely it is to actually be used as someone's home. The pressure for vacation rentals or second and third homes for people and those sorts of things is very high the closer you get to that coastline. And so the pressure for development isn't necessarily for what we imagine housing to be in general. It's really for well, investment vehicles, to be frank. That's what we see a lot of. And we would probably see a lot more of that without the Coastal Act right now in the North Coast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What is the Coastal Commission's role in the proposed wind farm and service buildings in Samoa? That's from Cameron.
So our role, well, it's not totally fleshed out what the role is in the end because the state legislature has made some language that for renewable energy projects that sort of reduce local control around those elements. So we may, as when I say we, the commission may actually see a larger role in that in some cases. But all the permitting, if it doesn't go through the local jurisdictions first, will go through the commission eventually. And there are definitely policies around renewable energy and then all of the resources that are to be protected. So again, it's like seeking the balance. We have what are called balancing provisions within the Coastal Act. It's not an absolute by any stretch, but there's definitely a role that the commission will be playing in that. And staff has been working on that, and we've been having meetings about it. And we have actually been facilitating the last 2 meetings ago. There was a report that the commission was a big mover on, which was basically an author of working with local fishing groups on sort of the how do we manage the transition and in terms of local fishing infrastructure.
So who has the ultimate say-so?
Well, I mean, that's a very multi-leveled perspective. I mean, so it's probably the last permitting process would probably be through the commission, but it's really hard to say because it's not impossible that the California Energy Commission could be what actually that goes through. So there's discussions around that the state legislature has been having in trying to figure that out because these are really major projects. And it's and they link a lot of things together. So the state is having discussions and thoughts around you just can't leave each little piece of it to one jurisdiction and another if you're really going to have a project of that size and scope actually come to fruition.
So is there any overriding decision maker along the way?
Well, ultimately, the legislature will be the overriding decision maker, I think, in terms of how things really roll for something that's significant. That's where the direction's going, and certainly you're seeing that with, there's a lot of criticisms about how we as a state approach infrastructure projects, and high on that list is the high-speed rail, and there's now been a book written about that, and so what I'm saying is I'm not clear or don't know necessarily where that decision will be made when it gets made.
Okay. Can you talk a bit about the wind farm and bay development to support that? What is the prospect for wind development given the current administration?
Well, in my view, I went to a conference a few months ago for offshore wind in California. It was a day conference. There was a lot of great speakers and discussion about that. But I think for me, the most significant of them was the one later in the day, and the speakers were from France, England, and China, and speaking about their offshore. And again, this is for floating offshore wind development. I think the message from them was pretty clear. You have the resources off the coast. They're significant from a global perspective, like the wind, your wind resource is very significant, and you have the need for the energy, and that will eventually drive the project. And their perspective was, we're developing this technology and moving forward at a pretty fast clip, and that when California, and well, actually, when the United States is ready to receive that technology and know-how, that they will be there to prepare to deliver. The problem, the message they were basically saying is, it's too bad your administration is not moving forward with this, because you're losing your ability to be part of basically the industry development in terms of the infrastructure that. And so you won't be leaders necessarily. You're setting yourself up to be reliant on technologies and infrastructure from other countries.
Yeah.
What problems do you see for the waterfronts of Eureka and Arcata in the far future?
Sea level rise is probably one of the bigger issues we're going to have to be dealing with in the far future, for sure. That is going to be impactful. We have our wastewater treatment plants, I mean, because water flows downhill, so they're all next to the water. We have a lot of our infrastructure around fishing and those sorts of things. And it's not just sea level rise that I would say that ocean warming is going to be an issue for us in terms of our ecosystems, for sure, and even potentially acidification. I think those are, more than anything, the bigger issues that we're going to have the least control over, which kind of goes back to the motivation for doing things like offshore wind, which is no one's doing it for fun. It's not because people want to, it's not just some sort of like profit motivating thing, although, it does in the United States, it is part of the driver for how things get done, and trying to provide affordable energy for people. But ultimately, the work is being done because the energy systems we have right now are being extremely impactful to our broader environment.
What did the Coastal Commission say about the environmental impact if the Amazon distribution warehouse proposal is built? Or was the Coastal Commission involved?
The Coastal Commission has not come to the commission, so there's nothing for us. There's nothing for the commission to review yet. So the commission doesn't review things until it comes through the local jurisdictions first. So, and I'm not totally clear that the commission has jurisdiction in this case. So we'll see how it comes out the other side.
When we were dealing with the Gateway project, part of the Gateway project was within the Coastal Commission boundaries. And we always wondered what the Coastal Commission would respond to those proposals to build 4 to 8 story buildings there, particularly with sea level rise. Did you ever get involved with that? And did Arcata ever revise its Coastal Commission report?
I did not. No, I tend to remove myself from things that are heading towards the commission, because it's a quasi-judicial body, and so I really can't involve myself directly in many things like that, because like I said, I can't have bias in those discussions.
Of course not. Yeah.
So, but I will say, when you ask the question, like, what's the Coastal Commission? It's really, what's the Coastal Act? It's really about the Coastal Act. The commission only looks at things through the lens of the Coastal Act. And so And again, there's balancing provisions. And in these days, for sure, one of the resources that or one of the issues that we have to really look at is, housing and its impact on not just coastal development, but then also the ability to have folks and people that can afford to live and be near the coast. It's meaningful, and there are certainly environmental justice issues around that for sure. So again, sea level rise is really important. There's avoidance, and then there's mitigation for that, and then there's also sort of the timeline issue. So um, we are now talking about, developments that what is the lifespan of that development? What is the and how that impacts the situation. But also in sea level rise, you'll see a map that has a line on it, and it'll say like this is where mean high tide will be in 50 years or whatever that is. But again, that's I mean, just because you touch that line doesn't mean you fall into the water and drown or something. It's like you're still, it's a, it's something to consider. I think some of the bigger impacts aren't necessarily what you might imagine above that line, but below in terms of impacts to groundwater and utilities that are subsurface, those sorts of things. That's kind of where you're going to be seeing bigger impacts. How do your sewer systems function under that scenario? And those sorts of things. And even streets and those sorts of infrastructure, we have to manage for our expectations about how we live in the future. I mean, maybe streets aren't, maybe a few times a year the streets are flooded with 6 inches of water, and we just accept that and live with that, and we adapt to that and manage for that. And I use the example of COVID. I mean, we adapted extremely in an extreme way to lifestyle changes that came from that pandemic. And we can adapt, I think, better than we might imagine to some of these changes. The things I'm most concerned about really, again, is the heating of the ocean, which is killing our whales currently off our coast. I mean, when people talk about offshore wind and the potential impacts to whales, and we're seeing just as many deaths of whales on the West Coast as we see on the East Coast. And so it's really the oceans changing is a much bigger factor in those species right now and continuing forward.
Does the Coastal Commission have any actions that can be taken with permits that have a high probability to increase introduction of invasive species to the bay?
Well, I would say one of the bigger things, again, that I would put out there that will change the species composition in the bay is water temperature. And so I just want to be really clear that we have to really be thinking about sort of the broader scope of what's going to be impacting Humboldt Bay, as well as the change of acidity. Those will have profound impacts on sort of what survives in the future. But the commission itself, it works in conjunction with other agencies, the resource agencies, in order to manage for how we protect the species in the bay. And one of the main issues that we've dealt with recently is when we've had oyster growers expand their production, such as Hog Island, and others who have production here, but they also have production in other places. And so we have to, make sure that their plans are uh, are keep that equipment from moving from one bay to another, for instance, because where they have some of their production areas, they have some diseases that would be very bad for Humboldt Bay. Um, and some of those operators are better than other operators, and so that's really important that we work with California Fish and Wildlife to make sure that that is something that we have to think about. We have we already have barges coming into Humboldt Bay consistently from San Francisco, but also we have Asian ships coming in currently for shipment of biomass. And what a biomass I mean by logs and chip. And we have programs. The state of California has programs to manage for that. So we just basically work within those confines.
Is there any push to renew the push to install nuclear power plants offshore?
I don't know anything about nuclear power plants offshore, so
it hasn't come up.
Hasn't come up in my realm, no.
To your knowledge, will the Amazon Distribution Center proposed, or is it more decided, have impacts to coastal resources, large vehicles, pollution, any issues to coastal wildlife? Is it within the coastal zone and your area? Okay.
It is. It is in the coastal zone. I haven't read the project description, so I don't, I mean, other than what I've seen on, lines on a paper. So I don't know what those volumes are. Again, it's future stuff is a little tough because it needs to go through the planning commission first for the county. And so if it's appealed to the board of supervisors or to the commission, then it's again a quasi judicial review, and I can't really get too into my thoughts on that. So because again, I can't walk into that in terms of bias. It leaves either of those agencies subject to litigation when we cross those lines in a way that an applicant or an appellant can feel like they have that we haven't done our job.
Is it true that there is discussion of moving 101 inland because of sea level rise and potential tsunamis?
The only discussions I've seen is about elevating 101, not moving it. So I haven't seen anything about moving it. But the Coastal Commission in 2018 or 19, I can't remember what year, when we approved the portion between Arcata and Eureka and basically required the Humboldt Bay Trail to be put in. Part of that was an analysis and a request for actually a requirement for an analysis for sea level rise and what was the plan for the road moving forward. And so Caltrans is continuously working on that, editing that, revising it because the science is changing, as well as sort of like, again, the constructs around what our expectations are in terms of level of service related to that connection.
If someone wants to bring an issue or project to the Coastal Commission, what is the procedure?
Well, typically you would bring it to your local jurisdiction first, assuming they have a local coastal plan or a local coastal program, and they would review it first before whatever, unless it's in a retained jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission, and in which case you would bring it to staff and early in the process. I was, just very, very early for review. And then it's just like any other permitting process. You submit a permit application and all the required documentation and studies and whatever they may be. And then basically it goes through just a typical permitting process.
And how often are local communities required to update their coastal zone plan?
It's nice if they can do it every 10 years. I mean, that would be great. And there's a process that there's local coastal plan amendments that are different sections. So like for instance, the Humboldt County did a lighting ordinance. And so every ordinance that we do, land use ordinance that we do has a upland and then a coastal zone component to it. And then the coastal zone component goes to the Coastal Commission for review. And then either approval or amendments are made. And then if amendments are made, it comes back to the body, to the supervisors for approval. And for instance, like we did a lighting ordinance, and so that went to the commission, and hopefully coming back soon to the board of supervisors so that we can approve those minor modifications.
And how do you interact if you do with the local climate action plan?
Well, if the local climate action plan has any ordinance changes or land use changes associated with it, then those would be and they're within the coastal zone, then that's where it would go through the coastal commission. I do believe that there is a nexus there. I just don't have it in front of me. I mean, I've just been actually been reviewing the draft of the local coastal plan right now, so I'm deep in it.
Oh, look at you. Don't get
Mhm.
buried.
Yeah,
There's a lot in there.
yeah.
Does anybody have any other questions at all? If no, say so or forever hold your peace. If that's the case, I'm going to
Wait,
tell you
wait, hold
that.
on one second. I just wanted to, before we
Okay.
close out, there's something that I do want to get into, which is again, the Coastal Zone Management Act, which is really important in terms of the feds and how they interact with the state of California, is um, being reviewed very seriously by the federal government. I strongly recommend folks reach out to Surfrider or at least go to their website and Humboldt Bay Keeper, excuse me, Humboldt Waterkeeper, Humboldt Bay Waterkeeper to see what you can do. There's comments period, I think August 10th, as well as maybe the 12th and the 13th. Um, it's really important because what the federal government is proposing and what could happen is the removal of Californians, all Californians, to be able to have comment or have participation in offshore oil leases, which they're proposing, and other activities. And so it's just this is a moment in time where that process is really under huge review by the current administration, and it's very unusual because we just went through this review, with NOAA 2 years ago. It's supposed to happen every 10 years, and they decided that they need to start that over again. And so we do understand, and so we're in that process, or we will be starting that process soon. And I really encourage people to have their voice now because it you may not have it after that. This is sort of the last chance. So
Is that information available? I'm sorry, Kate, you had a question?
Yeah, I just read an article on Howard Lutnick. I Googled Howard Lutnick and the Coastal Commission and found the article that shows that the federal government is trying to eliminate the Coastal Commission because they want to build, like Mike said, offshore oil. They want to lease everything. They want to privatize everything. And so it's really important. But Mike, I wasn't clear on who I should be contacting.
I think Surfrider is probably one of the main organizations in California organizing around this issue, and so I would say that they'd be the first organization I would go to. Hmm.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah,
Um,
California Surfrider.
right
Yeah.
on. Yeah,
Hmm.
they came up in the Google search right away.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're kind of the main organizers as far as I know. I mean, so
Is there
um,
any way to stop them, the federal government, from doing this?
again, that process is not one I can engage with in the same way because I'm part
Yeah,
of the agency under review. So it's like it's not I can't advocate in that same way, but what I'm advocating for is that people who are interested in this to engage themselves to do that. Um, yeah, I mean, anything I would say would just be inflammatory, I would imagine, I guess. I don't know. And so as we can't really, and again, the so I just encourage folks to engage with Surfrider and seek their guidance, I would say.
Yeah, it also involves mining the seafloor bottom for
Mhm.
minerals that are profitable. So it's not just the oil industry, it's both sides. And that mining of the seafloor, that's just really going to damage the fishing and it'll just change the ecosystem balance totally. So yeah, once again, capitalism is not a good fit with democracy.
Mhm.
People's participation, not a good fit. Great for authoritarian and tyrannical governments, but not so hot. And that's why we talk about balance, and yeah, it's fascinating to think about it in that format. Thanks for your
Mhm.
presentation.
Yeah.
Is the
Thank you,
state
Mike.
attorney general going to attempt to file lawsuits with respect to this?
The state attorney general has made statements that they're going to engage. They're looking at this very closely. Yeah. Yeah.
This started up just somewhat recently, didn't it?
Yep. Yep. And there
Back
hasn't
on
even, I don't
NOAA?
even think there's been a formal request yet. It just came up, basically like they do so much in this administration. It's just like a, a, a social media
Comment on
post that just says
truth
stuff,
search.
and then that's the policy all of a sudden. And so I don't really know. I think there might have been a formal letter that's been sent now, but the announcement of this review at first just came out on social media, and there's statements in there that are not true. But that's just how it goes. I mean, so and but I think again, it's just really important for folks to get engaged and put their comments in. A lot of what they're talking about, I will say, is about the impacts that they imagine protections and preservation has as a negative on the economy of California. And I think talking about the value of these protections for our economy is something that I think that's meaningful. I think that's really because that's basically, they're taking it from the Secretary of Commerce perspective as opposed to, it's not because I believe NOAA is under that department. So that's how they view it, right? Is from that angle, and so I would recommend, my recommendation is to really think about comments around the impact, the potential negative impacts that could happen if California doesn't have a voice. It's really about having a voice. Um, that's what they're talking about is impacting and limiting everyone in the state of California from having, but whether you live on the coast or you live in Modoc County or in Sacramento or Bakersfield or Riverside, we all are owners of the coastline. I think one thing I didn't really get into, and I just whatever that is, the biggest sort of like inherent conflict that we have on the Coastal Commission is with local governments. Um, and they're always mad at us. Oftentimes, I mean, we have a good relationship with most, but our biggest conflicts come in, the perspective that we bring is I represent not just people who live on the coast. I represent every Californian who wants to access the coast, whether they're, rich or poor or working class, or whether they're, of any ethnicity, and whether they live in the farthest flung corners. These are public trust resources that we all own together. And it's not just about um, what the coastal community itself wants necessarily, because they are there, but really the public trust resources that they are there aligned with is for everybody all throughout California. And I also have to remind folks oftentimes that these protections or these public access protections that we have isn't just for a coastal community in one place, but I may live in Arcata, but I want to access the coast when I'm in San Diego, right? And so the same protections that we have here that we do for everybody, I get to, that we as coastal people, if we traverse the coast, that we basically, it's not just for our community, but it's for everybody. Does that make sense, Aldo? All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I think it's probably the most important thing, and I probably should just start with that. But here we are. It's my closer.
Mike, is the public trust doctrines still being supported at the Supreme Court level?
The California Supreme Court? I think so, yeah.
But
I mean,
at the federal Supreme Court?
I don't know about the federal Supreme Court, because I don't have we don't have any real interaction with that, but certainly, the Coastal Commission is in constant litigation with folks who want to block the coast. I spend hours of every month listening to litigation, in terms of like review on those topics. And I will tell you that the state of California and through its attorneys, through both the commission and the state attorney general's office, I mean, for the most part, we win most of those conflicts, like probably 80% of those things. And so that is, it's important. And some of them are very long fought. Sometimes we're fighting 20 years just to open up a gate or something like that. I mean, it's pretty incredible how much people will fight these things. And we just keep hammering it, hammering and hammering. So yeah.
Do you feel like we're winning or losing? That's a
Mm.
good question.
Well, I mean, I just have to look at it in the context of California as a whole and where it's at currently relative to other states and countries. Is just we're way, way, way ahead. I mean, and it can, and again, it's like it's not the coastline isn't saved. It's in a constant state of being saved, and that battle continues. But there are many countries and even states in the United States where it's really difficult to find access to the coast and the beach, and California is not one of those places. And we are constantly, I mean, in every project we review, we're like, well, can we ask, like, where would we, request the trail to be? Where would we request the access? Like, we are doing that constantly. So, and most of the time we win those. Sometimes there are some tougher fights in there. Yeah.
Well, Mike, we really thank you and appreciate all the work you're doing and have been doing for years. And the knowledge you bring because of your time as well on the Bay Harbor Commission is invaluable. And there's some people that are impossible to replace because they don't have that kind of background. So keep at it. We encourage you and appreciate what you're doing.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate what you're doing here, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to and talk with you folks. And again, if you have other questions, people can email me at the county email. Happy to do what I can to get back to you as soon as I can on any kind of questions you have.
And I want to thank all of you who came and stayed and let you know that next week on July 20th, we have a talk given by Chrissy Loveman called Look But Don't Stare, How to Live More Confidently with Uncertainty, which is what we're still doing. We have a lot of uncertainty in this country. Creates a lot of anxiety. Anyway, she'll be very good. So we look forward to seeing you. Please consider signing up if you haven't already. You can also, if you haven't signed up to get the newsletter, which you can do online or call OLLI, you can also say, hey, I want to get the invitation as well to these talks. But they are available on the OLLI website. So anytime, and you can go on and look on YouTube and go look at any of the ones from, I think, 2017 on. We have them recorded. And you can look at each year separately, and they're in backwards chronological order, the most recent and so forth. So we thank you. This was very interesting and very informative. Appreciate all the questions from everybody as well.
All right.
So,
Thank you so much for having me.
okay, that's it, Jonah. You can shut us down. Have a great day and a great week. And go out there and conduct advocacy on our behalf.